welcome back to Cut From a Different Cloth. I am your host, Danny Parker, where Wendy meets Oprah. Now we are back with Christian White, our motivational speaker. You know, the conversation was just so good that I begged him to stay, and of course, he just was so happy to oblige.
Absolutely.
So we're about to get into the discussion. We can get right into it. Now, tell us about the Listening to Learn series first. Like, let's go into what is Listening to Learn.
Essentially, listening to learn is exactly what it is. So many of us think that we listen, yet we listen to respond. We already have an answer before somebody finishes what they're saying. And the way I experienced this most was first in my own household, growing up, which eventually transitioned into the courthouse, so many different places where I was either looked at on paper or I was looked at one specific thing that I did and I was already prejudged. You know, so many people thought that I went right from my mom's womb and jumped right into a Nashua Street jail cell. And it's like, there's a whole backstory that nobody pays attention to. And with this series, what I wanted to do is go around interviewing people from all walks of life, Black, white, middle-aged, younger, middle class, and all socioeconomic levels, all gender levels, all sexualities, everything, to begin to show that people are making decisions based on patterns we learned long ago, and to help open up people's eyes to their own patterns so that if they want to change some things about themselves, it might offer a blueprint or some insight into themselves to do. But essentially, I want people to not just simply judge people for their appearance or for one thing that they do. I want them to actually say, let me take a step back. Let me actually look at this person's history. Let me see if I can understand them better. That's the premise of Listening to Learn.
Okay, then. So, like with different cultures, we have, you know, like you said, Middle Eastern. If you had a Middle Eastern person and seeing, like, just having a simple conversation and finding out your lives do parallel in a certain type of way. So, is the universe, like, we're all connected because we're all people of different walks of life. But you're saying the Listening to Learn series is trying to explore that, like explore more of, well, I'm not going to judge you on your appearance. I'm going to, you know, really talk to you and see what your story is about, because it could possibly be like mine. Is that?
In essence, yes. So, I mean, ultimately, I think we all want to live up to our fullest potential. That's just a common belief that I have, that people want to be better than they are. And for me, one of the ways that I've become a better person was understanding that I could listen to people, learn from them, no matter what walk of life they come from, and come away from it with a way to better myself.
Wow.
That's in essence what it's about. So whether I'm talking to a young man who's in the gang life, still actively in the gang life, to a politician who tells me her story and it has nothing to do with that gang life, yet parallels to it in so many different ways. It just hadn't been looked at that way before.
So using that example, how could those two lives be parallel? Like a politician woman to a gang member, like a gang affiliate or whatever the case is?
So it's interesting. So I interviewed a woman named Nika, who happened to just win an election. And so we were talking. She was the first interview of the Listening to Learn series.
Oh, wow. Okay.
First interview, Nika Elegado. And she was telling me about her dad. And her dad would have been looked at as like a gangster at the time.
Okay.
Now, she said she vividly recalled how he would always have a gun. And that when men looked in her direction, he would say, look, I will go to jail, so let's not even go there. And she understood it as he was protecting her. And at the same time, he was sticking up for somebody else other than himself. So the way she interpreted that was, I'm not a street person, I'm not following this path. But she eventually went to MIT. She went to these schools, but she kept that thinking in mind of protecting people, speaking up for people.
Wow.
Whereas where I could talk to a young man and he tells me about what he heard of his dad, because he never met him, was the same exact way as Nika's dad, who was fully involved in her life. The way he interpreted is because he went through the street way, was I gotta protect them physically in the moment by any means necessary. So you have two very similar circumstances, yet two very different perspectives. Yet ultimately, they come back to the same thing, which is protection of self and protection of someone else.
Okay.
And when I look at these two stories, initially you'd be like, well, she's a politician. He's just the thug in the street. There's no commonalities there. But there's extreme commonalities. You just have to be willing to take that extra step and look a little deeper. Okay. And the way to do that is by listening to them.
Right, to listen to learn and not listen to respond. Now, with the youth, and specifically young Black men,
yes,
how are you able to reach out to them to get them to listen to learn and not listen to just, all right, old head, whatever you're saying, just really just waving you off? So how is that experience?
Let's be, okay, first, I always get emotional around these sorts of talks, and because I've been to prison many times for long periods of time, and I've been on the streets for long periods of time, and I've caused much destruction. And what I understood was, more than anything, within myself and others, was the amount of potential that was simply being discarded for the smallest of incentives. For the smallest of incentives. I know some brothers in jail that could take that camera down, put it back together. Amazing feats with the most crudest of tools, but they're doing life and they'll never be home to work at an MIT, if they would even be hired by an MIT. So it's like, when I see these young brothers in the street, they're begging to tell their stories, but nobody's taking the time to listen. Everybody is an open book if you have the right glasses on and have the right ears to hear them. Everybody is an open book if you take the time to listen, and I don't necessarily mean to their talking. I mean listening to their body language. And what I find interesting all the time is, the one thing about the streets is, on the crudest of levels, everybody accepts anybody from any place that is authentic. Whether you're a politician, a detective, another street person, whatever, if you come off as authentic, the BS radar for young men and women on the street, involved in the street, is way up here. Which is why they tend to take things personally so fast, because they can see through things very quickly, because it has to come with the territory, because I need to know if you're gonna hurt me or not.
Right.
And so I think one of the advantages that I have, first, I try to be as open and honest as I can be with them. I can't give you anything. I can only show you how to reinvent yourself, how you can go from being this to being this. And I can show you the process in between. Some motivational speakers, or however you want to look at them, lack the ability. They can tell you where they were and where they are. But that doesn't help the person who's in it trying to get there. You have to be willing to walk them through the process. And with the Listening to Learn series, with what I do in the streets every day, it's talking to them about them. How are you feeling? How's your kid? How's your mom doing? Do you know your dad? Do you, questions, just basic questions that we would look at as, there's so much else going on. Why are we talking about that? Because that's what they want to be They want to find moments to be vulnerable, because they grow up in a way that stamped out their vulnerability. But the reality is just as much as we're intellectual beings, we're emotional beings. We are all male, female in that sense. And it's finding that balance. And I just have happened to be able to find that balance. When I was a kid, I couldn't be in a crowd of well-to-do white people because I saw them as better than me, as higher up, part of the man, however you want to look at it. Now, if I was in now, I would be quick to shoot up a whole stadium full of black kids that look like me. But if I was in a crowd of white people, I was scared, timid. I didn't want to be looked at, talked to, approach anything. I was hoping I could close my eyes, and that meant I disappeared. As I began working on my own mental health, which involved listening to myself, I began to make some major breakthroughs in the categories of self-value. I lacked self-value 100%. I never learned it. The value that I learned was I'm only as good for what I can be used for in the moment.
Wow. So you felt yourself to be, that people could basically use you, that you were okay with being used?
Absolutely. Because that's how I received love as I understood it.
So you felt being used was equate to being loved? Like that was the
More than love. Love, liked, wanted, respected, endeared, everything.
So you felt that someone had to use you. If they weren't using you for a meal ticket, for being whatever, they didn't love you?
Absolutely.
So if they didn't want anything from you, just to love you, you wouldn't believe that?
When I moved into my uncle and aunt's house, when I was 13, my dad sat me down and he said, "Christian, I can't afford you anymore. You have to leave." I was given two options. I could move in with my biological mother, who I met just a month before that, for the first time, or I could move with my uncle and aunt over on Wambach Street in Roxbury near Humboldt. I chose to live in Boston because at least it was closer. It was in Massachusetts. My biological mother was living in Kentucky at the time. When I moved into my uncle and aunt's house, they're both pastors.
Okay.
So I went from a moralist household, ran with an iron fist, to a household full of love where there was no iron fist at all. You want to talk about cultural shock for a kid? It doesn't get any worse than that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It doesn't get any worse from being abused to being loved.
Wow.
So me and my aunt, we only reconciled our lives and emotional and spiritual lives within the last 5 years because I hated that she loved me properly. Because for me to be loved properly meant I had to be open to it. And if I was open to anything, that would mean that I could be used even worse than I had ever been used before. At least I could be controlled. I could control how I was used before. But if I accepted that somebody loved me and actually had to open up to them, I didn't know where it could go. So I didn't want to take that risk. So I pushed back.
Okay. So basically that love you were afraid of, like that was a true commitment because that's someone who didn't want anything from you. Not saying you didn't have anything to offer, but they weren't looking for whatever you had to offer. They just wanted to give you love because they saw what kind of, like you said, you came from a moralist household. They saw that you needed love and wanted to pour into you. So I can get that being a total culture shock. Like, whoa, what are you doing? Like,
so within this 6 months, I went from selling weed to selling crack to playing with guns. After the 6, I was drinking. Back then we were drinking St. Ides. We would, it was malt liquor. I was getting high and drunk every night. What eventually happened is, after 6 months, my uncle and aunt are like, "Look, we love you, we want you here, but we really can't keep continuing on like this, knowing that you're hurting yourself." So I said, "Well, okay." I voluntarily went to the courthouse, and at this time it was Department of Social Services, DSS, and I asked to have a chins put on me, just so I could go to a foster home where I would at least feel a little more normal than where I was at the time. And I did do that.
wow. You felt that you needed to go into foster care instead of being and so many people, I know those children were like, "Man, what's wrong with you? Like if I could be home with my people who love me, who know my mom, who know my dad, why would you want to be here?" Because foster care, it's like that's a step up from juvie in a sense because you're not locked up, but you're treated a certain way. You have restrictions. You have it's structured.
And what people don't take into account more, what they should take into account more often than not, is mentally, I was gone at 9 years old. Anything that I eventually ended up becoming involved in, which was eventually the gang life, I was primed for that gang life long before I ever held a gun, long before I ever sold drugs. My mind was already gone by 13 when I moved in. Intervention needed happening way before that.
Okay. So with that then, you felt you couldn't open up to your aunt and uncle to tell them how you were feeling, what was going on with you, because of what was the fear that was holding you back from?
By that time, I had decided I would never open up. So there was a situation that happened. I'll give two quick examples. In 5th grade, I was being hurt by a teacher, and I told my dad about this. Previously, I had not told my dad what was going on in the household. These are separate incidences. But I told my dad what was going on at school because I felt like I was betraying my abuser at home.
Wow.
What people have to realize is no matter what's going on with you, if you're dealing with another person, it's still a relationship. The problem with being a child is you don't know how to process the emotions of a relationship, but you still feel all the same emotions. Kids feel jealousy, anger, hate, rage, the same thing adults do.
Yeah, they're little people.
They're little people, but it's just that adults hopefully can navigate those. Now, I told my dad what happened. We went to school the next day. It's not like today where it's a big deal. Back then it was like, let's just go talk about it, see what's going on, whatever. I'm thinking my dad's gonna, beat him up, whatever the case may be. We get there. We go into the principal's office. We tell the principal what happened. He calls the teacher into the room. Now, nowadays they wouldn't do anything like that, but he calls the teacher into the room. And I just started crying. I could not stop. And in my household, if you cried, you got hit for crying, which usually led to you crying even more. And so and my dad was like, why are you crying? Tell the teacher what you just told us, all this stuff. I couldn't stop crying. So my dad gave me one of those ear twisters that he used to give us. And he just said, the stupid MFer must have been lying anyway. And he brought me home and grounded me and then sent me to school the next day as if nothing ever happened. So that was that I decided then and there I would never talk about anything, ever, no matter what.
So then what made you decide from then to now? Like what was that turning pivotal point that
The turning point was my aunt, ironically enough.
Really?
So I went to state prison when I was 18 years old. And they had just built Susan Baranowski, we know as Shirley Max. I was in Shirley Max, and I was talking to a family member on the phone, and they told me about how the women in my family went on a retreat. Everybody pitched in, they flew all the women in. And my aunt had revealed what she had experienced as a girl, and this is public information now, what she had experienced as a girl growing up in her household. I had heard about this. And previously, I had never known words like depression, anger, anxiety, things of that nature. I had never known things like this. And so when I heard about her story, I wrote her a long letter. I wrote her a four-page letter. I was listening to Aaliyah and everything. And I detailed what had happened to me. And it was the first time that I had let that out like that. I love my aunt so much now, it's hard to explain, but she didn't write back because we were still kind of
going through that.
We were still going through it.
That.
A simple letter doesn't change all the history we had together.
Right.
So my uncle came and visited me, and I told my uncle, I reiterated the letter, we talked about it, and I remember in the visiting room, I cried. I couldn't help it, it was just coming out. And I'll never, because in prison, you're told don't do this, don't do that,
You have to
be tough, da-da-da-da. And I was tough. Everybody knew I was everything. And I'll never forget that the dudes in the visiting room, and we still kind of controlled the prison at this time. They came up, they were like, white boy, they used to call me white boy. They were like, white boy, they gave me hugs. They were like, are you okay? What can we do? And like, people don't understand why I love the streets so much. Is that because not only did it teach me morals to a degree, but it showed me that camaraderie, that brother love, that it loved me like I had never known, like I had always wanted. And so after I saw that I could get love by telling my truth, it sparked something in me at 18 that said, wow, maybe you don't have to be hurting people or whatever to gain attention. Maybe you can get what you want by sharing with others. And I didn't begin the path I'm on now then. I actually became worse because now that I had brought it out, I was walking around like an open wound. But it at least began the process.
Now, going to switch topics then in a way, from single cell to single dad, you said that it started when basically you went to prison again at 8.5, when your son was just only 8.5 months in the womb.
Yes.
So you didn't get to meet him, and then by the time that you did, when you got out, you was about to turn 9 years old, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so how was that then, from single cell to single dad?
Okay, so I went in when he was 8.5 in his mom. I saw him twice when he was an infant, like 10 days old. And then I saw him twice when he was turning 3. The next time I would see him was when I got out and he was almost 9.
Okay.
And so about a year, our year anniversary was December 28th of me having full.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Congratulations.
yes, absolutely.
Congratulations.
Yes. And so the one thing that I didn't know, I knew that I wouldn't be coming back to jail again. I knew there were certain things that I knew I would never do again. What I didn't know was what kind of dad I would be. I didn't know that because I've seen so many men get out after doing a long time and run their household like the CO runs the cell block because that's what they became accustomed to.
Oh.
And so I said, well, I'm not gonna do that. And then I said, I'm not gonna just do the opposite of what my dad did because I don't wanna be enslaved to the way, I don't wanna have my dad on my mind when I'm thinking about my son. I wanna have me on my mind and him on my mind.
So breaking generational curses then.
Absolutely. So all 4 forms of abuses were passed down to my dad. My dad passed down 3 of them, minus the sexual. I have passed down none of these, but I did miss the first 9 years of his life, if you include the 9 months he was inside his mom.
Wow. Well, Christian, again.
Oh, shit.
This always happens to us, right? We get into the good
yeah.
conversation and the good part, and then that's when the credits roll. It's
Absolutely.
always like that. So we're going to have I have another show that I'm going to do, guys. Something in the works for the good dads. I'm glad we get to talk to from single cell to single dad because you're not one of the only guys that I know
Absolutely
that have full
not.
custody of their son. Sorry. So I'm going to have a special project about that. So guys, you will see Christian again. But thank you so much for being on A Come From a Different Cloth. Thank you so much.
This was awesome.
I appreciate you. They appreciate you. Thank you so much to my crew, you guys. Thank you for helping me get through the new year. We're going to have a good season. So it's your girl, where Wendy meets Oprah, aka Danny Parker, and it's Cut from a Different Cloth. So.